Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Here are the stories we're following today.
Karen, we begin with political turmoil for two key U.S. allies overseas. Let's start in France, where Prime Minister Michel Barnier is facing a vote of no confidence. Far-right leader Marine Le Pen and her National Rally Party have promised to support a motion from a left-wing coalition that would topple the government. Barnier is urging lawmakers to step away from the brink.
I hope so, and it's indeed possible. It depends on the members of the National Assembly, each whom has a responsibility to the French people, to the voters of their constituency, and before France too, which is at a rather serious moment.
French Prime Minister Michel Barnier spoke through an interpreter. Bloomberg's Kriti Gupta is covering the vote from Paris. She says there is enough support from the left and the right to bring down Barnier.
There could be a little bit of a make-or-break case when it comes to the Socialist Party. That is, of course, the most centrist faction when it comes to the left side of Parliament. What's significant here is those are the people that both Michel Barnier and Emmanuel Macron have targeted in the last 24 hours, saying that these are the people who could vote for with their conscience or need to potentially make or break this vote. And that's where so much of the speculation lies, that if you do see enough socialists in Parliament abstain from the vote, there is a slim but not impossible chance that Michel Barnier could make it out with this vote with his job intact.
Bloomberg's Kriti Gupta reporting from Paris. Debate on the no-confidence motion is set to begin at 4 p.m. in Paris. That is 10 a.m. Wall Street time.
Well, Nathan, another political crisis is playing out quickly in South Korea. Opposition lawmakers have filed a motion to impeach President Yoon Suk-yeol. That's after he briefly declared martial law to try to break a political deadlock. Bloomberg's Katya Dmitrieva reports the next 24 to 48 hours will be key.
The main opposition party is seeking this impeachment or resignation, and it could come as soon as Friday. They need 200 votes out of the 300 members. They have just under that, so they'll have to rely on some people from Yoon's own party to come over to their side. So we'll probably be expecting a lot more before the weekend is up.
Bloomberg's Katya Dmitrieva reports the opposition is also pursuing treason charges against South Korea's defense and safety ministers. The defense minister has offered to resign. The crisis sent South Korea's currency plunging as much as 3% before it regained most of its losses. Bank of Korea Governor Ri Chang-yong says markets are stabilizing.
Actually, I'm very happy that the impact has been short-lived. Definitely, we have to see how these political events will evolve. In the meantime, we focus on providing ample liquidity to stabilize the market.
BOK Governor Ri Chang-yong tells Bloomberg it's not likely that interest rates will have to come down in response to a short-lived political event.
Let's turn to politics at home now, Karen. President-elect Donald Trump may be considering a change to one of his key cabinet picks. Let's get the latest on that from Bloomberg's John Tucker. John?
And Nathan, the Wall Street Journal reports Trump is considering Florida Governor Ron DeSantis as a possible replacement for Pete Hegseth to run the Pentagon. Hegseth, the former Fox News host, is facing accusations of alcohol abuse on the job and sexual misconduct. The New Yorker magazine has written about a whistleblower report on missing money from veterans organizations he ran. On Capitol Hill yesterday, South Carolina Republican Senator Lindsey Graham voiced his concerns.
Some of these articles are very disturbing. He, obviously has a chance to defend himself here, but, some of this stuff is going to be difficult.
The choice of DeSantis would be a remarkable turn. The Florida governor's decision to challenge Trump in the GOP primary began a bitter war between the two, with Trump casting DeSantis as disloyal. In New York, I'm John Tucker, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, John, thank you. Well, Trump's pick for Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent plans to meet this week with key Republicans as he begins preparing for confirmation hearings. Sources say the veteran hedge fund manager will meet with Senate Republican leader John Thune later today. Spokesperson for Trump's transition team says Bessent also plans to meet other key Senate Republicans, including incoming number 2 leader John Barrasso this week.
And as President Trump continues filling his cabinet, Karen, his transition team's working to get them confirmed. We get more on that from Bloomberg's Amy Morris in Washington.
The team signed an agreement to allow the Justice Department to conduct background checks on his nominees and appointees after a weeks-long delay. The step lets Trump transition aides and future administration staffers obtain security clearances before Inauguration Day to access classified information about ongoing government programs. It also allows those nominees who are up for Senate confirmation to get those background checks lawmakers want before they vote on them. In Washington, Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Amy, thank you. Well, Donald Trump will be in New York tomorrow to be honored at an annual awards show hosted by Fox News. The president-elect says he will receive the Fox Patriot of the Year award. Adweek says Fox News has seen its ratings increase since Trump's election victory last month.
Turning to markets now, Karen, futures are higher after yet another record close on Wall Street. The S&P 500 notched its 55th record high of the year. Jeff Kleintop, chief global strategist at Charles Schwab, says investors should look outside the U.S. next year.
I really like what I'm seeing in Europe. I like outside the U.S. for 2025. And I know you see headlines as to what's going on in Europe, and you think, well, how could you like this? But look, we're likely to see accelerating global economic growth outside the U.S. and China. And that means countries like France, better economic growth next year than we saw last year. We've seen rolling recessions through many of these major economies over the last 6 quarters, and earnings recessions as well. That's likely to change in 2025. So rising economic and earnings growth points me in the direction of some of these economies that are rebounding, like what we're seeing in Europe.
Charles Schwab's Jeff Kleintop says a trade war could pose the biggest hit to global growth in 2025.
Well, Nathan, now let's take a look at some stocks on the move this morning. Shares of Salesforce, they are up about 13%. The top seller of customer relations management software reported quarterly revenue that topped analyst estimates. That's boosting investor hopes that the company's much-hyped strategy for artificial intelligence products will lift financial results.
And shares of Marvell are also up, Karen. They're higher by more than 12%. The chipmaker delivered better than expected results and an upbeat earnings forecast, citing demand for artificial intelligence computing.
Turning to the economy now, Nathan, the Federal Reserve's last policy decision comes 2 weeks from today, and investors will be looking for clues on the future of rates from Jay Powell later today. The Fed chair speaks at the New York Times Deal Book Summit at 1:40 Wall Street time. You can hear his comments live on Bloomberg Radio, television, and the Bloomberg Podcast YouTube page. Meanwhile, Chicago Fed President Austin Goolsbee says rates need to be lower.
Over the next year, it feels to me like rates come down a fair amount from where they are now. Just the inflation series is kind of my pet metric. It's the most important part is to look at inflation and not just the aggregate, to kind of break out the categories. And so my pet thing has been housing inflation.
And Chicago Fed President Austin Goolsbee was echoed by San Francisco Fed President Mary Daly, who said rates should continue to fall. Time now for a look at some of the other stories making news in New York and around the world. And for that, we're joined by Bloomberg's Michael Barr. Michael, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. Jury deliberations will resume today in the trial of Daniel Penny. The Marine veteran is charged with using a fatal chokehold to subdue a New York subway rider whose behavior was alarming other passengers. Penny, who is 26, is charged with manslaughter and criminally negligent homicide charges in the death of Jordan Neely, who was homeless. Penny has pleaded not guilty and maintains that his actions were justified. The jury asked within the first 75 minutes of deliberations to rehear the judge's instructions on justification defenses and on the definitions of the crimes charged. There's concern about the skies outside New York City with a drone mystery over New Jersey. They've been spotted flying near President-elect Trump's Bedminster golf course and near a military base. In the video, this man says he saw the drones.
I can see 3 drones just in this view. There is another one over here and another one back here.
Authorities say they acknowledge the public's concern about the drones, but say there's no immediate danger. Today, the Supreme Court will hear arguments in a case which impacts access to health care for hundreds of thousands of transgender and non-binary youths across the country. A 2023 Tennessee law bars the use of treatments like puberty blockers and hormone therapy for transgender teens. The parents of a 15-year-old transgender girl represented by the American American Civil Liberties Union, saying the law violates the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution by discriminating on the basis of sex. Sam Law is with the Human Rights Campaign.
These healthcare bans discriminate against trans youth by denying access to the very same safe and effective medications prescribed to people who are not trans to treat, a range of health issues.
Supporters of the ban say there is not enough data on possible long-term consequences. Yesterday, the Supreme Court heard arguments in a case involving compensation for Holocaust survivors and their heirs for property confiscated during World War II before victims were sent to death camps. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Karen.
All right, Michael Barr, thank you. Time now for the Bloomberg Sports Update, brought to you by Tri-State Audi. And here's John Stashower. John, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. Knicks and Magic at the Garden to decide who would advance to the quarterfinals of the NBA Cup, the in-season tournament Knicks needed to win. Orlando just needed to not lose by 37 points. In the third quarter, they trailed by 37 points, but the final was 121-106, so the Magic advance, and the Knicks will now play a home game next Wednesday against Atlanta, and a win gets them to the semifinals in Las Vegas. Karl Anthony Towns led the Knicks, 23 points, 15 rebounds. Coach Tom Thibodeau liked that 5 Knicks scored between 18 and 23 points.
I loved how unselfish we were, and I thought they made great reads when we got into the paint, just making the extra pass, and then creating the right space, and then cutting, which got us going downhill. And when you do that, everyone finds rhythm, and you find in good shots. You're creating good shots for each other.
Cleveland beat Washington by 31. The Wizards have lost 15 games in a row. The Islanders have lost 7 of their last 9, 5 of them by 1 goal, a 2-1 overtime loss in Montreal. The Bruins won in OT, 3-2 over Detroit. Capitals lost 2-1 to San Jose. When the college football playoff was only 4 teams, 2 losses would usually knock a team out of contention. Alabama has lost 3 games, but now with a 12-team field, looks like the Crimson Tide will get in. Committee has them playing a first-round game at Notre Dame. Miami was ranked in the top 5, but lost 2 of its last 3. Blew a 3-touchdown lead last Saturday at Syracuse. Looks like the Canes are out. Aroldis Chapman signed with the Red Sox, whose bullpen struggled in 2023. Chapman has pitched 15 seasons for 7 teams, 2 stints with the Yankees. ESPN reports the Juan Soto decision could happen this week. 5 teams, Mets, Yankees, Red Sox, Blue Jays, and Dodgers, said to be willing to give Soto in the neighborhood of a 15-year, $600 million contract. John Stashower, Bloomberg Sports. Karen, Nathan.
Coast to coast on Bloomberg Radio, nationwide on Sirius XM, and around the world on Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
Good morning. I'm Nathan Hager on a morning of political crisis for 2 major U.S. allies, starting in France, a country that could be headed into uncharted political territory before this day is out. Lawmakers are set for a no-confidence vote against Prime Minister Michel Barnier that could topple the government. President Emmanuel Macron, though, is urging lawmakers to reconsider, saying it would be a vote of, in his words, unbearable cynicism. Joining us from Paris is our Paris bureau chief, Bloomberg's Alan Katz. So, Alan, thanks for being with us once again. Is Macron's call to reject this no-confidence vote likely to be heated? Good morning.
Good morning. How are you, Nathan? It's not likely to be heated. In fact, it's not being heated. We had Jordan Bardella, who is the president of the National Rally, though he's really sort of the number 2 person in the party behind Marine Le Pen. But he was on French radio this morning saying that his party was going to vote for the no-confidence motion. You also had the head of the Socialist Party within the National Assembly. So again, this left bloc that's also going to vote or expected to vote for this no-confidence motion is sort of a range of parties that go from the far left to sort of more like the Social Democrats, this is where the socialists are. So there was some hope by Macron and Barnier and calls from them last night for the socialists to sort of peel away, but their representative this morning said that they would vote for that motion as well. So it looks like both Macron and Prime Minister Michel Barnier, who made a similar call last night on French television, that they're not being heated.
Now, the president, Macron, has said he is not going to resign amid this crisis. But how much pressure, Alan, is he under right now?
So So he's under a good deal of pressure, but you have to remember that the French presidency is a lot like the American presidency. You're elected, in France it's 5 years rather than 4 years, but you're elected for a term, and that's it, you're there. Now, there is an impeachment process in France, but it's never been used under the current constitution, which came in 1958, and that's not, no one's really talking about that. So Macron is in power. He remains president as long as he wants to. Now, people will say, but the country can't be governed, and the only way to change things, some politicians are saying this, the only way to change things is for Macron to resign. He said yesterday when he was in Saudi Arabia that he was going to serve to the last second of his mandate. So he certainly doesn't seem of a mind to resign anytime sooner than that.
Now, all this started when French President Macron called this snap election back in July to try to stop the far right. Now it seems like the far right is calling the shots here. Is that right? And what's the end game, if so?
That's a good question. So the answer is, yes, your timeline sort of works. Like he actually called the election in June. The election happened in July, or the second round of it in July. And it's true that Marine Le Pen and the far right have become much more powerful as a result, because Macron's support base in parliament really receded. The number of parliamentarians for the far right really increased, and so you have this sort of three sort of main blocks in parliament, and no coalition that's sort of being able to be formed to pass a budget or continue even to have a government. So that makes Marine Le Pen very powerful. What the end game is a big question, because under the French Constitution, you can't dissolve Parliament and call another election for at least a year after the last election. So that puts us from the first week of July to the 2024 to the first week of July 2025. So until then, we're stuck with this parliament, or France is stuck with this parliament. And so even if you have a new government, it's stuck with many of the same problems that Barnier had. As I mentioned before, Macron can't be forced to resign. And so it's not quite clear what the short-term game is. The longer-term strategy would be for there to be a dissolution of parliament. You hold elections again, July 2025 would be the soonest that could happen. And then maybe voters bring in a pretty different-looking parliament than the one they have, and you really have a majority. But between now and then, it's going to probably be pretty tenuous and perhaps slightly chaotic on the political front in France.
Yeah, we'll see how that chaos potentially plays out after this vote is set for later on today. Thank you for this, Alan. Great to have you back on with us once again. Alan Katz, Paris bureau chief for Bloomberg News, with us from the French capital this morning. Now we want to turn to the fast-moving political situation in South Korea, where opposition lawmakers have filed impeachment motions against President Yoon Suk-yeol less than a day after he shocked his nation and investors by declaring martial law. Joining us from Hong Kong is Bloomberg's Jill Desis. Jill, this has been such a fast-moving situation. It's been head-spinning. How did we get to this point? Good morning.
Morning, Nathan. Yeah, it's been a really wild 24 hours in South Korea. Look, I'm not going to say that everything was going incredibly well for President Yoon leading up to this point. He certainly had a very tense relationship with the opposition party. That's the Progressive Democratic Party. They had a majority in parliament. They've been really stonewalling him on various measures over the past couple of years, and thwarting his plans for the budget. They've actually threatened impeachments against some members of Yoon's government, and had been probing, some allegations that they had over matters involving both the president on election interference, and then also some questions about his wife's purchase of a very suspicious handbag. So there's been all kinds of drama happening in South Korea recently, but it really does feel like we've gone from 0 to 100 here. In just a matter of hours last night, you had the president appearing on television, giving a very late television address saying that he was declaring martial law. And it does seem like this announcement came with very little insight from members of his own cabinet. It was really just the defense minister who actually went to high school with the president, along with a few other senior military members that seemed to know even that this was happening. And then it very clearly was obvious that he had very severely miscalculated. He was forced to essentially rescind this martial law order within just a matter of about 6 hours when the parliament pretty overwhelmingly said, absolutely not, you're not going ahead with this.
To stick with the analogy of going from 0 to 100, we had the governor of Bank of Korea, Ri Chung-yang, on Bloomberg television seeming to try to tap the brakes a little bit to try to calm the markets. What could the market reaction be as this continues to unfold?
Well, what we've seen so far, I mean, certainly when the president declared this martial law order last night, we saw a pretty significant drop in the Korean won. That's the currency. There's a lot of concern going into morning trading today about how that was actually going to weigh on markets. We did see the benchmark index, the Kospi, close a bit lower, but things have started to stabilize. Essentially, what the central bank has come out today to try to do is say, look, our policies aren't going to be impacted by all of this. We understand that obviously there's a lot of turmoil within the government, but it does seem like, that very quick action by Parliament to, essentially shut this down and say, if you're not going to go ahead with this, did seem to kind of calm nerves a little bit. The central bank has said, look, we're prepared to sort of step in and sort of help the currency if we absolutely need to. But ultimately, what they're saying is that their policies, including, what they're doing with policy rates, aren't going to be impacted by this turmoil, even if they did acknowledge that there's obviously going to be quite a bit of tension going forward. And as you mentioned, we have this, prospective impeachment vote that could be taking place as well.
And certainly this is raising a lot of questions about how South Korea is going to be able to govern itself going forward if this impeachment move does progress. I mean, there's still a lot of challenges for this country from China, from North Korea. I mean, how could this play out over the next several weeks?
Well, it certainly seems like, the opposition party, so again, they've got a majority in parliament. So they really only need, I think, around 10 or so more votes from members of Yoon's own party to, try to impeach him. It does seem like since he kept the circle around, this martial law order so tight, I'm sure it seems like, it's very likely he's angered some members of his own party here who have actually disavowed this action. So once we get to that point, what ultimately could happen is that it's the opposition leader that could ultimately step in and then become the president. What that likely means, though, is that that progressive party, that other party that's that opposition right now, they actually take a bit of a softer policy toward North Korea, for one thing, and that could have some pretty broad implications as to what that means for South Korea's relationship with the U.S. and obviously incoming president-elect Donald Trump could have some implications for the war in Ukraine, given North Korea's relationship with Russia. So there's a lot that does have the potential to ultimately change here, depending on how things move forward.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak, your morning podcast on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed by 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else you listen.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 92.9 in Boston, and nationwide on Sirius XM Channel 121.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, now with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto interfaces.
And don't forget to subscribe to Bloomberg News Now. It's the latest news whenever you want it, in 5 minutes or less. Search Bloomberg News Now on your favorite podcast platform to stay informed all day long. I'm Karen Moscow.
And I'm Nathan Hager. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.